Welcome to Transformation from the Inspire Library. Transformations is a webinar series about where quality relationships come from and how we can help create and maintain them. We will also address what can be done when the way we interact with others is less than ideal or even toxic and destructive. Our plan is to show by using everyday life stories how we play a role in fostering positive, even humane ways of relating, and how it is possible to contribute to inhumane ways of interacting. In saying this, we are not saying that all relationship problems are self-inflicted. We will not be talking about the effects of brain tumors, chemical imbalances, hormonal abnormalities, and other sources of troubles that we can experience. We will be talking about the social, emotional, contextual dimensions of human experience. These are the kinds of relationships where we play a major role in the quality of our interactions. Actually, there are probably three sources of troubles that we experience in life that we can do something about. One is ignorance. If we're ignorant, we need knowledge, do we not, to solve certain problems? If we're incompetent, that is, if we don't have the skills to do what needs to be done to solve the problem, then we're not going to solve that problem either. The third way, I will call resistance. Resistance often is a refusal to get the knowledge or the skills that we need in order to solve a problem. And resistance is something we address first, because if I can give up my resistance to a problem, then I have a starting point to solve the problem I'm working on. So that's why we are not talking about those dimensions of experience that we can do nothing about, such as a brain tumor or whatever. To present our approach, we will use stories, some from our own experiences, and some as illustrated in movies and books, and will enlist you in telling your own experiences, be they positive or negative. We will ask you to share your stories anonymously with selected family life educators who can help you tell and video your stories of inspiration about relationships and how humane relationships can be maintained and how inhumane ones can be abandoned. In this introductory episode, we invite you to consider this possibility, that there are two ways of approaching life, two ways of being in the world. We can call one way hardness, which suggests rigidness, unresponsiveness, stuckness. We can call the other way softness, which suggests responsiveness and not rigidity. In other words, we can be hard or inhumane with others, or soft and thus humane and compassionate with others. Now, here's an example. A high school student, Bill, in California, is asked by his mother to drive to the grocery store and get her some avocados and lettuce. She wants to have her dinner ready for her husband, who's a long-distance truck driver, and she does not want to be late after he's been gone for 3 days. She asks her son not to dilly-dally. Bill reaches the store in good time, and as he walks into the store, he sees an older lady leaving the store carrying two obviously too heavy bags of groceries. By the time he gets to the produce section, he is no longer thinking about avocados and lettuce. Instead, he's been muttering all the way into the store about the dumb lady being burdened by heavy bags. He even says to himself, hasn't she ever heard of shopping carts? And where are those bag boys when you need them? When the boy told us this story in a classroom on relationships, it was in response to our asking this question: have you ever been in a situation where you felt something was right to do? He revealed that he felt he should have helped the woman with the groceries. More on that story in a moment. The next day in class, we asked another question. Have you ever been in a situation where you felt something was right to do, but you simultaneously refused to do it? We didn't have to say any more because Bill raised his hand again and said, yeah, that story I told about the lady and the groceries. I felt I should have helped her, but of course now you know that I didn't. We asked him if he could remember his thoughts and feelings once he got to the produce section. He said, well, my grumbling about her stupidity and not using a card and my whining about bag boys not doing what they should be doing, I think since I had a feeling to help her and didn't, I was just blaming other people for the problem. We suggested a few minutes ago the possibility that had he helped the woman, he would have had no reason to blame others. He didn't say this, but we suggested an additional excuse he could have used to justify his not helping was that his mother said not to dilly-dally. Thus, had he helped a woman with groceries and got home late, he could have been accused by his mother of being irresponsible. But if he had felt to help the woman and all he had to do was tell his mother the truth, surely things would have worked out. Bill's conversation with us illustrates our proposal that there are two ways of being in the world and seeing and treating others. We can think of the one way as following certain felt imperatives, feelings to do and things that we ought to be doing. And the other way as resisting felt imperatives, as resisting those things that we believe would be right to do, or even reluctantly or resentfully. In some ways anyway, not doing anything fully the way we felt we believed we ought to. The one way, the hard way, is wholehearted. The other way is double-minded. So the two ways of being in the world that we are talking about is being responsive or resistant to our own conscience regarding how we act and the qualities of what we think and feel. Now, this introduction to our webinar series, we're addressing a key feature of our role in creating and maintaining quality relationships. Our work is about viewing stories of how quickly we can change from the way of toxic behavior to a better way, the compassionate way. These stories show that rapid change needn't require exercise or medicine or therapy. The change of the heart of the matter is our change of heart. This change isn't a matter of gaining a skill or losing a habit or gaining more knowledge. It's a change in how we see people in the world. Now, we're going to view and comment on stories. We won't be able to hear from all of you, but if you go to Inspire Library and create a free account, you can have written comments on these stories. And then you can meet in a small group session to discuss your comments and arrange your individual sessions to carry out a treatment plan of coming up with a story of inspiration about the quality of your own relationships. We start with a video story about a baby and her mother. Then we go to a story about a parking lot, and then one about driving home.
Okay, so this is the inspirelibrary.org. And here we've got these shorts up here. And these are the 5 categories of shorts. And we're doing this one right here, which is changing. And so here is this first one. If I can get it to come up. There we go.
Do you want to do full screen?
Babies this young are extremely responsive to the emotions and the reactivity and the social interaction that they get from the world around them. This is something that we started studying 30, 40 years ago, when people didn't think that infants could engage in social interaction. In the still face experiment, what the mother did was she sits down and she's playing with her baby, who's about a year of age. I'm like, girl. Oh. And she gives a greeting to the baby gives a greeting back to her. Yeah. This baby starts pointing at different places in the world, and the mother's trying to engage her and play with her. They're working to coordinate their emotions and their intentions, what they want to do in the world. And that's really what the baby is used to. And then we ask the mother to not respond to the baby. The baby very quickly picks up on this. And then she uses all of her abilities to try and get the mother back. She smiles at the mother. She points because she's used to the mother looking where she points. The baby puts both hands up in front of her and says, "What's happening here?" She makes that screechy sound at the mother, like, come on, why aren't we doing this? Even in this 2 minutes, when they don't get the normal reaction, they react with negative emotions, they turn away, they feel the stress of it. They actually may lose control of their posture because of the stress that they're experiencing. I'm here.
And what are you doing? Oh, yes. Oh, what a big girl.
It's a little like the good, the bad, and the ugly. The good is that normal stuff that goes on that we all do with our kids. The bad is when something bad happens, but the infant can overcome it. After all, when you stop the still face, the mother and the baby start to play again. The ugly is when you don't give the child any chance to get back to the good. There's no reparation, and they're stuck in that really ugly situation.
So the questions we have here under where you could put comments is, what stands out to you in this story? How would you role play these parts differently? Is this like anything you have experienced? If you would like to experience a change in a life challenge you are facing, tell us about it here. Those are the kinds of things. So what stands out to you? I guess what stands out to me is that baby immediately sensing there's something wrong here, and then trying one thing or another to pull the mom back. And then how quickly the baby returns back once the mom connects with her again. What stood out to you, Terry?
The instantaneous transformation of the baby from joyful to fearful, or from happy to confused and upset. It was amazing the speed with which that happened once the baby saw the still face.
Yeah. I find it interesting that researcher was saying that they didn't think that children were interacting like that, but clearly they are. It's so important that somebody is there responding. And it was interesting to me too how he said this is the way we normally are with children. I mean, it's hard. Could you imagine how hard it was for that mother to stay still face for a little while? That's unnatural. It's weird. So any comment?
It's passive.
Okay. What were you saying?
You say it's passive child abuse.
Yeah. Okay, so now we're going to look at one of these other ones. Which one do you want to look at first? The parking lot or the driving home, or?
The parking lot I want to watch first.
Okay. We unfortunately don't have it videoed yet, but we will. So we just need to read this story. So do you want to read it?
If I'd known that, I would have chosen a different story, but here we go. Woman in a shopping option here. She says, I had been looking for a parking place in the grocery store parking lot, which was always full, and hunting and pecking for an open space was always potluck. I had been up and down the 3 rows several times when I saw a car 1 row away leaving. I had to speed down the lane I was in and do a 180-degree turn into the lane with the opening. The now empty space was 2/3 of the distance I had to travel, and I was anxious when I saw a car enter the lane from the other end. That driver had only half as far as I did to get to the space. I gunned my accelerator, but could tell that getting there in time was hopeless. Virtually immediately, I started fuming that here I had been paying a price hunting for a slot, and this interloper, this sudden intruder, had just arrived and was going to be able to park without any sacrifice of time at all. I decided that whether life was fair or not, I was not going to just surrender to the unfairness of it all. I slammed on my brakes as I neared the now occupied parking stall and slid my car so that it blocked the newly arrived parker from behind. I got out of my car and slammed my car door just as the woman who had robbed me of a deserved reward was getting out of her car. Her back was to me as I stormed forward. I inhaled, preparatory to blasting her with a verbal condemnation for her thoughtlessness. As she turned around, I saw that she was my favorite aunt, who I was supposed to have visited once I had arrived from the new sensitive 3 weeks ago, for the new semester 3 weeks ago. Instantly, I threw open my arms, cried out with joy, Aunt Mary, how good to see you. We had a long enough conversation that I was startled to hear the tap-tap of the horn of the car next to where Aunt Mary had parked. My car was blocking hers. The driver rolled down her window and said, you guys look like you're having fun, but if you'll pack up and let me out, I am willing to give up this space for your car. With a mischievous smile, she also said, Otherwise, I'll get really grumpy and spoil your day. I started laughing, thanked her, and got out of the way and got to a parking space as well. After talking too long to Aunt Mary, and after she left, it dawned on me that the girl in the car has been as grumpy with me as I was preparing to be with that once anonymous woman who had stolen my spot. Things would not have ended well if I had been that grumpy.
Okay, great. So again, the questions are what stands out to you in this story? How would you role play these parts differently? What part, Terry, would you pick and role play in a different way?
When we offer people these kinds of stories, it's amazing to me how often they want to be the bad guy or the bad girl. They want to play the person who is being hard or grumpy or obnoxious or unsettled. Certainly, fewer people want to play the role, so to speak, of someone with compassion, sense of sacrifice, concern for others, recognition for the needs of others. Those kinds of dimensions of the person who is more soft-hearted in a situation like this, fewer people choose to play. But it tells me then that obnoxiousness is in the public domain is so common, we begin to believe the lie that compassion and soft-heartedness is harder. It really isn't. The only reason softness appears harder is because hardness suppresses it, ignores it, disqualifies it, doesn't even give it a space in our experience to take seriously.
Yeah. So for example, in this particular story, the other lady that offered to give them a space to put the car, she could have been hard. She was soft and she was funny and humorous about it as well. But she could have said something like,
well, are you people going to sit here all day? Do I have to go get a policeman to get you out of my way?
yeah, could have said something like that.
It's so hard to come up with those kinds of options.
But of course, she didn't respond in that way. And but notice the part that stands out to me is notice how instantaneous when she recognized that that was her favorite aunt, it just changed. It's not like she had a bad thing in her that she had to root out. It's an evil nature that has to be suppressed or something like that. It's just immediately shifted. And that's what we are capable of.
It's interesting when people who matter to us come on the scene. We have every ability to welcome them and enjoy their company and enjoy their presence. If in family relationships, we get in these hard-hearted moments, we may not always be willing to give up that hardness as quickly as this woman in the parking lot did, simply because maybe we're used to being grumps sometimes. And we've got to figure out a way to pull the rug out from under ways of being that are toxic and destructive and that we feel terrible about even after the event has passed.
Okay, good. Well, let's go on to the next one. This one is called Chuck Driving Home.
This is from a friend of ours, by the way. We got a federal grant once, just to explain this to you. We got a federal grant that allowed us to go into the public schools of several states and see if what we could do to teach something about hardness and softness to junior high and high school students. So this is a story that came from one of us who was teaching public school teachers how giving up hardness is possible. Here's the story. Chuck, a friend of ours, was driving home from work one day in heavy traffic. The cars in front of him always seemed to be going slower than necessary, and certainly too slow for our friend, who was anxious to be home. As he approached an intersection where a line of cars was waiting to enter the flow of traffic, he noticed the front car that in the line ahead of him was inching forward, looking for a break in the traffic so he could slip in. Chuck, noticing that a small gap had opened between him and the car in front, quickly sped up just enough to make sure there was no room for any car to squeeze in. No additional car was going to get in ahead of me, he thought. In his mind, other drivers were the enemy. He had to be vigilant, lest the driver in front showed even more intruders from side streets how to get in
And usurp
usurp
his
my
place.
place, my deserved place in the traffic line. With a white-knuckled grip on the steering wheel, Chuck was alert in every moment to possible attacks on his position. But just 5 days later, on the same highway with similar traffic, and with the ever-present line of cars at the same intersection waiting to slide into the flow, Chuck found himself, without even thinking about it, taking his foot off the gas and waving for the first car from the intersection to go ahead of him. For whatever reason, Chuck was relaxed rather than tense, just heading home in familiar surroundings as he would on any other workday. Sometime after he got home, he realized that he had not been the same person that day as he had been 5 days before. Virtually every aspect of the situation on both days was exactly the same, except for him. He was different. No white knuckles, no impatience or resentment, no seeing other travelers as obstacles out to complicate his drive home. To be sure, his attitude, emotions, and even his thoughts were different that day than they had been 5 days before.
Okay, so what stands out in that little story? By the way, this I think this is probably okay to say, this person who tells this story is himself a therapist, and he's seeing. Is that common for therapists to recognize that in their own behavior?
I know it's possible. I just don't know how frequent it is.
I see. Okay, but it seems to be important for therapists to be able to recognize that, right?
Yes.
That there are times that we harden and pose and get into a role. I've got to protect my spot in this driving kind of a thing, and I can't do this and I can't do that, and I must do this, and it is feeling like you've got to do something which is really distasteful to you to do, which gives you a dividedness.
Right. By the way, I've noticed that with hardness, when you give it up, there's no real sense of guilt at how that person had been before, unless you want to drag it out and say, well, we're only human, and these things are going to happen, and I had a better day than the other time, but I could be hard again at any moment. Well, that may all be true, but if you were saying it to yourself the way I tried to play it just now, you're just giving yourself an excuse in advance for the next time you're a jerk in traffic.
So you're saying actually that when that change occurs, you're not feeling guilty. You might think that you might be surprised at how you would behave like that, but you're not feeling guilty.
I think you're feeling humbled.
Humbled.
I think that's something where we acknowledge that we have feet of clay, but that we don't have to have a way of always living that way. And the fact that we come to that humble understanding only when we are soft-hearted is pretty significant.
Yeah. Yeah.
Could it be that,
and presumably you would say that when you're in the middle of the hardness, you're not recognizing that you're being hard.
I'm absolutely blind to my own role in the troubles that I'm being white-knuckled about.
Yeah. Yeah. It's these bad drivers or whatever that's making me have to do this kind of a stuff. Plus
so
the sense that I need to do this, even though it's distasteful and
can you hear me?
so it's kind of a divided kind of a mind. It's not a wholeheartedly saying this is what I need to do, and I do it.
Yeah,
it's not that.
Yeah, once we become humbled, we are no longer insisting on holding on to the hardness that is creating the problem.
Okay, good. Now here's our last one for today. This one is called Two Students, and it's a little bit like the one that Terry that you told before.
By the way, we got these stories from real students when we were working in public schools in several states, so we're not making these up. Two high school students were asked the question, have you ever been in a situation where you sensed or felt something was right to do, and you did or didn't do it. Jeremy told the following story in response to this question. Jeremy had a deal with his mother that they would take turns doing dinner dishes. One night, when it was her turn to do the dishes, he looked away from the TV, and in seeing her at the kitchen sink, he was struck by how worried she looked and had a sense that, her night or not, he ought to go in and help her to do the dishes instead. But he returned to watching sports on TV. Jeremy was asked another question. Can you recall what you were thinking and feeling when you turned back to the TV instead of helping your mother? What are your guesses, audience, as to what he said? We would like to give you time to do that in the future. He noted that although he had turned back to the TV, his mind was on how fair it would be for him to help his mother, and that she might come to expect him to do it every night. And he said he was irritated that he was feeling guilty about not helping. Casey told the following story, different student. She was headed after soccer practice to her English teacher's class to ask her questions about the assigned essay. As she approached the room, she heard a loud voice from inside. She looked through the opening in the door to the room and saw a male student punctuating his yelling by shaking his fist at the teacher. Casey said later that virtually without thinking, she burst into the room and said, "Hi, Mrs. Colvin. Do you have a minute to talk to me after you're finished here?" The boy fell silent, stepped back, and left the room. Mrs. Colvin thanked Casey for rescuing her and said, "Casey, I didn't know what was going to happen. I'm grateful you showed up, but coming into the room like that, you could have been hurt. Did you know he was threatening me?" Casey said, "I heard him yelling, and through the door I could tell it was a bad situation." Mrs. Colvin said, "Oh, what were you thinking? You could have been hurt coming into the room where he just was out of control." Casey said, "Well, I wasn't thinking really. I just felt I should do something. And coming into the room seemed like the right thing to do."
Okay, good. So what stands out in that story? Now, Jay, you had a comment. I think it was for the previous story. What did you want to say?
I was just going to say, I think there are actual times, injustices, where there's some where it's appropriate to be upset, but we're giving examples of somebody. I feel like it's applying it to something as little important as driving in traffic. Could that be going on, that people feel like, okay, there's obviously a place for righteous anger, but then the problem is they're misapplying it.
Here's a possibility to give you a starting point on that good question. When we are living softly, the quality of our being upset is worlds away from when we are hard in our heart and upset. When we're upset while being hard, we are seeing ourselves as victims. We are seeing life as a burden, and everything is somebody or something else's fault. We might even be blaming ourselves in a way of saying, "Well, I never was very good at controlling my temper," but that's an excuse when you're in the hard world. What is being upset like when you are not being hard? When you're being soft, do you become a doormat for the people's injustices around you? Or do you have a starting point for a solution? This girl standing in the hallway had a soft sensibility about Mrs. Colvin, and that she had to do something rather than nothing. And so it's not that she wasn't upset. It's that she was not paralyzed in doing the right thing that she obviously felt to do. And her emotions were probably pretty strong in terms of being concerned and compassionate about the threat to Mrs. Colvin. So there's upset number one and upset number two. When we're upset while soft-hearted, we don't create or magnify or make the problem more extreme than it is. When we're upset while hard-hearted, we are insisting that we couldn't help but do anything else, but be obnoxious, or that we join the fray in being hard. Anyway, that's too short an answer, but it's a starting point answer, Jay.
And it goes back to that sense of that in hardness, you're feeling to do something while you are saying that you can't do it. I should say something kind, but I can't.
Right.
Versus, and you're divided, rather than to say, I need to say something to this person to help them recognize that they shouldn't be doing this. And
So-
that doesn't have, that's not double-minded.
So the person that was not supposed to dally and also felt like he should help the woman, why doesn't that create a valid a valid conflict? Or do you think perhaps perhaps he's exaggerating, dallying, like he can afford 1 minute to help this woman? Or what do you think?
What was interesting is when he told the story to us, we knew that his mother had said, don't dilly-dally. But interestingly enough, the rest of the semester, he never raised the issue, and his mother never raised the issue of him being a little bit late. In fact, I don't think he was late enough for mother to have a sensibility about it. Only later did he tell her, did Chuck tell her about the lady that he failed to help when he felt he should. And even then, he didn't even worry about the idea of his mother criticizing him for being late, because frankly, the time difference wasn't enough for her to even have a sensibility about it.
Yeah.
She just welcomed him home and grabbed the avocados and lettuce and went to work.
And I think the point that you made earlier was that he could have said, he could have made it say, what am I supposed to do? I am supposed to not dilly-dally, and yet I feel like I should help this lady, and I just can't do it. And all that is, that's saying, feeling to do something, and with somehow justifying why you can't do anything. And it's not creatively thinking of what you should do. I mean,
Well, I
Terry,
feel like it's thinking that the universe has created these rules that are contradictory for yourself.
Good point.
yes,
and
that's right. And
That's the problematic thinking, is that somebody's created these rules that you have to do these two impossible things.
Later in these webinars, we will talk a little bit about what it means to face moral dilemmas. There are, quote, true moral dilemmas, and there are false moral dilemmas. Or should I say that moral dilemmas that we experience while hard-hearted turn out to feel differently about them once we give up our hardness. Then they are no longer a hardness that, they're no longer a dilemma that is real, but was actually created by our own hardness. Anyway, that's down the road. What's the difference between a true dilemma and a false dilemma?
okay, well, very good. So we've tried to keep these little webinars to about 45 minutes. So what we would encourage you to do is to go to the site, create an account if you don't already have one, and then go to one of these stories and put some comments on it. And so right here underneath there is where those comments could be, or role play something. And maybe you could even role play it with audio, and then just put the audio clip in there. And then what we'll try to do is get back to you, and in small groups where we can respond to your particular comments about these things. We really are trying to do these webinars in such a way that we could do it with a few people, or we could really get a lot larger and do it with many more people. And so you are kind of the pilots for us working with this. Kent, did you have a response? I'm curious, any thoughts you might have?
Only thing I came up with was, is there such a thing as righteous anger?
Oh, yes.
We would
We
would talk about anger 1 and anger 2. What's anger 1? Well, we'll call it what your emotions are of a certain quality when you're soft-hearted. And anger 2 is the self-betraying, hard, irritable, and helplessly out of control feeling that happens when we're that angry.
We'll show you some movie clips that are like that. One of the important things is to ask yourself, what stories come to you in your life that you could tell, and that we could have a writer help you polish, and then actually some videographers to video it and even composer to add to it. So let me share with you one story that illustrates how rapidly things can change. So I was up on the BYU campus. My wife was taking a class, and I was watching our youngest child, Angela. She must have been about, I think, maybe 11 or 12. We were walking around while my wife was taking this class, and I was watching what she was looking at. She would look at these flowers and notice these kinds of things, and I was noticing them with her. I was kind of connecting with her, just like that mother connected with the baby in terms of what the baby would point to and so on. And right in the middle of all that, then Angela said to me, you know what? Crystal has been mean to me. And Crystal was her good friend. Just out of the blue, she confided that in me. Now, that was an occasion for me to stay right there with her and to think about it with her, but I didn't do it. What I did was, well, that's too bad because you're such a good friend. Why don't you just keep track of how she acts in the next little while and then share that with me? Well, that was not a very soft response to her. And she immediately, just like a dime, said, oh, I was just kidding about Crystal. And I realized that the conversation had just been shut down. And I realized that it was because I had not continued to be connected with her. I was getting on my high horse and giving her advice, do this, and then come back and we'll talk about it, and sounding very officious. And it just did not reach her. And her change was not over a certain amount of time. It was just immediate, and it was actually shocking to me. But it just helped me realize what I had done that was inconsiderate to her, and what I had done that was considerate to her, walking along with her, looking at the things that she was looking to, responding to things, and then she opens up with something like that, and I let it drop. So anyway, that's my little story. And you see, I could tell that little story right here where it says here will take you to a little part where that story could be put in. You could title it, and you can always change the title, briefly describe the challenge. The challenge I was facing was how to be able to talk to my daughter about her problems that she wanted to share with me, tell a little bit about the story, and then you can submit it. And then we've got writers and videographers that can help you polish up that story so that it will become memorable to you. That's what our plan is. Well, thank you so much. We will contact you back when we're ready to do the next webinar. And you see, we just did the one on changing right there. The next one will be specifically about hardness. And then following that, there's one on collusion, which is hardness inviting hardness, and softness inviting softness, and counseling, which is interesting. But the next one will be in more detail about hardness. So thanks again. So we'll see you later. Bye-bye.